Hello, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to Satsang. Satsang is an ancient spiritual practice from India. It means being in reality together. I give Satsang live every Wednesday and Sunday night in Portland, Maine. This Dharma talk was recorded during one of our Wednesday night gatherings. Please visit jayakula.org to learn more about the teachings. You can find video satsangs on Jayakula's YouTube channel, and my books are all available on Amazon.com. Much love to you, wherever and however you are. Today I want to talk about a word that is really central to the Trika tradition. It's vimarsha. It's kind of following up on the talk from last Wednesday night, when I was talking about karma. And I was talking about how we in our culture tend to think that karma is like our inner machinations, like our patterns of body, energy, and mind, our own patterns. But we don't tend to see every circumstance that we're in and encounter and every person as an aspect of our karma. But that indeed is true. It's also an aspect of other people's karmas too. Doesn't just belong to us. And I was talking last week about how we should look into circumstance and always use all of our circumstance to reflect on our condition and to help us to wake up, not just what's happening inside. Those of you that are on MGO, you can listen to that recording. It's online. So vimarsha means self-reflection or self-awareness. It's actually a very deep word with a lot of different layers of meanings. But if we look in the Kashmiri tradition, there are two words that are companions, vimarsha being one of them, that signify the supreme reality. The first word is prakasha. That means light of consciousness. And that word is equivalent to what we could call Shiva. And vimarsha is that power of self-reflection, and that is Shakti. So these two things go together, prakasha and vimarsha. So here are some of the terms that are used. An act of consciousness, that's one of the meanings of vimarsha. So what consciousness does. Self-revelation. Self-revelation is what this entire reality is engaged in. We are obsessed with finding out stuff like the truth or who we are or what's really happening. You know, everyone in the globe is obsessed with that on some level or another. And that's because we are reflecting the main activity of God, which is self-reflection, and we are doing it in our own limited way, but that's why we're so obsessed with that activity. We are simply reflecting the nature of reality when we are trying to understand ourselves or understand somebody else or understand some situation, or try to make something better, or try to get to the root of something or the truth of something. I mean, even people that have wacky ideas about the truth and, you know, all their own specialized wackadoodle systems of what truth is, those people are also just engaged in that massive cosmic-wide process of self-reflection, of vimarsha. Active consciousness, that's another meaning of the word vimarsha. So it's said in the ancient scriptures and commentaries and teaching texts of this tradition that prakasha, the light of consciousness on its own, is inert. But because it is imbued with this active principle, vimarsha, then it has the power to create all of these different experiences and reflect on its own nature through the process of life in total. Vimarsha is also called the free activity of consciousness. So there's a word in Trika Shaivism, swatantriya, which means freedom of self-expression. This vimarsha is this power to create an infinite number of self-reflections. So vimarsha is actually expressing the freedom of this primordial reality. And then another phrase I found in the ancient scriptures that I was looking in before tonight, free and spontaneous self-apprehension. So here's what Kshamaraja says. He was a student of Abhinavagupta's, the founder of this tradition. Here indeed, the Supreme Lord has as its nature the supreme light, prakasha. And the intrinsic nature of that light is a free and spontaneous self-apprehension. So our efforts at self-apprehension are not free and spontaneous on one level. On another level, they are totally. But on one level, our efforts of self-apprehension are tortured and earnest and effortful and all that stuff.
What is apprehension?
Our efforts to know ourselves, to understand other people, to understand circumstances, to get to the bottom of what's really going on, to discover truth or reality itself, are effortful and limited and often tortured. But some not always, sometimes they're joyous. The way that this reality in total reflects on itself is by producing this incredible number of reflections of its own nature, all universes, all beings, all circumstances, and enjoying those, enjoying its own nature in that free and spontaneous way. This is actually, you could say, our journey as practitioners. We want to journey from limited, tortured methods of self-observation and self-reflection to the sort of open-ended, dance-like, free enjoyment of all the reflections of our nature that are everywhere. This self-apprehension, self-understanding, vimarsha, is the original and natural I which manifests, illuminates, and destroys universes. And it, in this way, shines forth. So the word for shining forth, how this prakasha, this light of consciousness shines forth, how it shows itself, how it announces itself, is called abhasa. That means appearings. So all of these appearings are part of the process of self-reflection, of self-understanding, of enjoyment of its own nature that this reality is engaged in. If the Supreme Light were devoid of this free and spontaneous self-referential capacity, it would be powerless and inert. So self-referential means being able to say I. Not just to feel I, but being able to say I and you. So what Kshamaraja is saying is that without duality, there is no self-reflection. Without this experience of many, there is no self-reflection. There's nothing to reflect on. There's no reflector. There's just awareness. Ah. So this is what somebody wrote in a commentary about this. Consciousness is not just a clear crystal which mirror-like reflects all things that fall upon it. It has an intrinsic capacity of self-referral, which makes it alive and powerful rather than inert and powerless. The self-referential capacity is the Shakti, the power of consciousness. The Shakti is responsible for the process of manifestation of all finite appearances within the infinite light. So this capacity to manifest is the basic notion of vimarsha, the capacity for consciousness to be conscious of itself. Self-referential. Then this commentator goes on to say something very crucial for us in our community. In addition, the self-referential capacity of consciousness lies at the basic of yogic sadhana. The ability to do sadhana and reflect on your own nature while you're doing it or as a result of that. To be able to recognize your own nature, to be able to reflect on your real condition. This is the basis of all yogic sadhana. The techniques of tantric meditation employed by the tradition, Trika, engage this essential characteristic of the very nature of consciousness. So we aren't just doing things mindlessly. We aren't just doing things without reflecting on our experience, without reflecting on the fruit of our practice, without reflecting on the wisdom that's being shown to us, and without reflecting on our limitations, on our condition of limitation. And what is being said here is that we're not just doing that self-reflection out of there's no ethics involved. It's not like it's the good or the right thing to do. It's because that's what this reality does. We are participating in the Supreme Shakti's life process when we engage in self-reflection. Do you understand that? It's a little bit deep.
Could you say it again, please?
Sure. Let me start from a different angle. As above, so below. Everything we're doing reflects the nature of the Supreme. What's the difference between what we're doing and the nature of the Supreme?
Nothing, more limited.
Okay, both are true. Nothing and more limited. You're both right. A+ on both scores. If we are still having the experience of separation and we don't have view under our belt, we will say that the way that we reflect is limited. And when we feel that way, when we haven't yet glimpsed enough of the view in a concrete way, if someone reflects something to us and we find a flaw in it, we'll say, "Meow." Somebody said last week, the reflections that they get from the community are imperfect. That is a dualistic, limited view. From the absolute view, which is actually something in this case that can be our lived experience, all mirrors are perfect reflectors. Every situation is a perfect reflector of the wisdom that is expressing itself in that moment. If we can approach everything with that bhav, with that understanding, that everything that is happening has perfect wisdom, is the perfect situation, and is reflecting to us perfectly the wisdom of the Supreme, then we can use our own limited powers of self-reflection to try to understand what is being spoken to us. Remember that vimarsha, the Supreme Shakti, is also the Supreme Word. This world gets spelled into existence in both the magical and the literary sense. One of my favorite teachers said that this reality is a text. And when you learn to read the text of reality, you can throw away all your books. You don't need any books of theory and philosophy and view and blah, 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 if you can read directly the text of reality. And when we are practicing self-reflecting through our own practice, through working with the teacher, through working with the community, we are participating in this text. We are learning how to read this text. It's never about whether anybody's right or wrong. It's always about the wisdom that's being spoken to us directly. Sometimes the wisdom is in the form of our own reactivity to a certain situation. We get to see our limitation. We think we're doing really well in our practice. Everything's just, we're calming down, we're seeing all this stuff, and then someone comes along and, pulls our chain a little bit and we freak out. That's grace, basically, right? In every spiritual community, you'll find people that really rub people the wrong way, and these people are really cherished by teachers. Because if you had nobody rubbing you the wrong way, you would always have false ideas about your own level of realization. You would never be provoked to see what's actually going on a little deeper level. There's that famous story of Gurdjieff. Probably some of you have already heard it. But when he was teaching in Russia, some guy was there in his little troop of students who really just annoyed the shit out of everyone. Everyone couldn't stand him. And finally this guy got in a big fight with somebody, and he stormed off and he said, "I'm leaving and I'm never coming back." He packed up his stuff, and when Gurdjieff found out about this, he ran down the road after him. He said, "Look, I know you don't like this stuff, but can I just pay you to stay?" So self-reflection in all of its different forms is not just something that's good for us. It's actually the primordial Shakti. It's what gives us power. It's what lets us be effective actors. It's what gives us creativity. It's not just some burden that something we just have to put up with, right? If we can't reflect subtly and deeply on our condition as we're practicing to feel and see what is happening and what is being given to us, if we can't reflect deeply and subtly on our relationship with our teacher, if we are not engaged in reflecting on every little nuance between ourselves and our teacher, then we're missing out on a lot. If we're not reflecting on every little interaction that we have, and when I say reflecting, I don't just mean with our intellect, I mean with our body and our energy too. If we're not deeply engaged in reaching into situations and questioning them, if we're not grateful when something really disturbs us or makes us uneasy and gives us a chance to excavate some other bit of karma that we hadn't noticed up until that moment, we're not taking full advantage of the situation. We are very, very partial actors in the world and impoverished in our experience. There is absolutely enormous subtlety here, of a kind that most people can barely imagine, or can't even barely imagine. And that subtlety is read by us through our mind and all of our senses. And if we are really participating in this tradition, we are actively engaged in cultivating our abilities to read and receive and reflect in a very deep way, like pulling out of ourselves everything we possibly can. When I was younger, for my whole life until I ran into this tradition, I just always felt, you've heard me say this many times before, I always felt that any situation I was in, or any relationship I was in, or any school I was in, was only demanding from me a very small part of what I felt I was. And I just had this very deep longing to meet something that would require me to go to the limit of what I was capable of and really ask me for everything that I had, or thought I had. And then when I met this tradition, that was really it. So this tradition and this kind of practice, and I think any kind of practice that anybody goes into full on, will just require from you that you manifest every skill, every scrap of intelligence, every scrap of creativity, every scrap of sensitivity. And I think the one leg up that I had was that I really wanted to do that. It really all hinges on desire. It's like, do you really want to do that? I desperately wanted to do that. I felt like a fallow field, like an unused but very fertile piece of land. And I wanted to be used up in this way. So whatever degree of desire that you have, understand that you have an opportunity when you encounter a real wisdom tradition, and it could be anything, really, any wisdom tradition. Every wisdom tradition demands, or at least opens the door to you having the opportunity to just plunge your senses full on into that encounter with wisdom and see what you come up with. That's the real way that our bodies and our energies and our minds are what we are actually using. We have methods, we have mantras, we have this, we have that, the other. We have techniques coming out of our ears. The one technique is you. right? It's your body, your energy, your mind, your senses. That's the ultimate technique. Jayakula is a nonprofit community offering opportunities to learn and practice in the direct realization traditions of Trika Shaivism and Dzogchen. We are based in Portland, Maine and Portland, Oregon. Visit jayakula.org to explore more of our offerings.